What's up everybody, it's Victon here with my second League Starter build guide for 3.14 Ultimatum League, the Carrion Golem Necromancer. This one is following my Elementalist Carrion Golem League Starter, and while they are both similar, there is some pretty big differences within them, so make sure to take notes on the changes as you watch this guide, and I will of course discuss the differences in the builds as we go. So my goal with this build, like any of my other League starters, is to deliver you guys a powerful but budget summoner build that is beginner friendly and explains everything you need to know, not only leveling passive skill tree paths, gear and gem setups, but also leveling tips and gear upgrade orders as well. I've also tailored this build to be as strong as possible of a league starting character, so you can set yourself up for a super successful league, both in boss farming and mapping alike. And it doesn't matter if you're a beginner in Path of Exile or a seasoned veteran, this build will easily take you to and beyond red tier maps, and even to in-game bosses, which in my opinion this build specifically does specialize in. As I always mention, the Carrion Golem skill itself is known as one of the best skills in the game for newer players, because it kind of just lets you run around in circles and learn boss fights or league mechanics, all the while your golems are doing the damage for you. Even with the Carrion Golem nerfs this league, I still do think this is going to be a great league starter. It's just a super safe playstyle that offers great damage as well, so it's a combo that just you can't beat very easily. Now with this build specifically, there were changes to Carrion Golems, like a general 11% damage nerf and a questionable clear speed nerf with AoE. There were also some changes to the loved aura stacking version of the build, in that our medium cluster jewels got nerfed and we're no longer able to hit that 90% max all res, as well as losing a bit of DPS on top of those two. Those nerfs weren't build breaking though for the aura stacking in-game version of the build. It is still a thing, but I do believe it puts it more in line with the Elementalist version of the build. And I also believe that the Necromancer probably doesn't go low life aura stacking anymore, but rather focuses on being a life version all the way through the in-game and maximizing your DPS. The in-game version of the build will certainly do more DPS than the Elementalist version, but will be slightly less tanky, so it's going to be a personal preference of which version people choose to play. I just want to mention those changes before we get into the build. And before we dive into the guide, if you guys end up enjoying this, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for a ton more Path of Exile content just like this. I also have linked below my Twitch channel where you guys can come in and ask as many questions as you want. I honestly love helping you guys out with your builds, so hit that follow button over there too if you're interested. Also, if you're interested in supporting the channel, I have a link to my Patreon below, which is going to get you access to my community Discord where I do personal build reviews. And we're all just in there chilling, having a great time, talking about PoE and builds all day, every day. There's also a new way to support the channel, thanks to GGG, since they set up the Path of Exile Nexus store. Basically, you can support me by purchasing cosmetic armor sets for Path of Exile, and I get a small cut of those proceeds, which, by the way, all goes directly back into this channel to help improve the content and grow our community. So if you're interested in purchasing an armor set in Path of Exile, definitely check the link posted below, and you can get added bonus of supporting the channel while getting that new fancy armor set that you've been wanting. And even if you guys aren't able to, no worries at all. I appreciate every one of you for just watching this guide and being a part of our awesome Path of Exile community. Anyways, that is enough of that. Let's get back into the build guide. And what we're going to be doing first is, of course, hopping into Path of Building. After that, we're going to be going over the gem links for the leveling setups and also the mapping setups. And then we're going to talk about our gear choices and our gear upgrade paths to help you guys progress through the league. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into Path of Building. Alright, so here we are, and first things first, if you are new to Path of Building, make sure you download this free app at the link in the description, and if you already have it, just make sure that you're running the community fork version of the app, since it is the most up-to-date version. You're going to want to copy the POB Pastebin link I have in the description of this video, come up to Import Export Build in the top left here, then we're going to click on Import from Pastebin, we're going to paste the text in here, and then we're going to hit Import, and you are good to go. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that I have included leveling paths, which you can access by clicking down here, and you can go through each of these as you level up your character to see exactly where you want to put your points and in the order you put those points. You can also check out the skills I have set up for the mapping version of the build. Same with our gear setup, there is a tab for that here if you're interested in seeing all of the items specifically that we have for this build. Now, I won't go over every single little note here for the tree, but what I will do is go over generally what we're going for in the tree, and also the more important nodes we will go into a little bit more in depth. Throughout the tree, you're going to notice that we focus mostly on grabbing lots of life nodes, minion damage nodes, and jewel sockets. The first important node that we're going to be picking up is Golem Commander. This buffs your golem's damage and buff effects, as well as giving you one additional golem, which is the most important thing. You typically pick this up around level 34 when you do your first Labyrinth trial. You're going to end up starting with 2 Carrion Golems. We also get Fearsome Force pretty early on, since our AoE clear speed got nerfed a bit this league. This should counter that a little bit, and we should actually come out with a little bit more AoE than before. For our first 2 large cluster jewels, we're going to need to roll at least Rotten Claws on them to help us reach exactly 100% Impale chance. If you're able to get Vicious Bites, Primordial Bond, or Renewal on any of those, that is nice additions to the jewels, but it's not 100% necessary. Which brings us to our 4 medium cluster jewels. You're going to want to grab 4 passive mediums with at least Replenishing Presence. Getting First Among Equals as well on there would be nice, but it's not necessary as a league starter, so at least try for Replenishing Presence first. As far as Ascendancy choice, we are of course going with Necromancer. Now, tons of people ask about Necromancer versus Elementalist, and to make a long story short, the Necromancer is overall more DPS, whereas the Elementalist has a little bit more defenses, but again, less damage, so it's going to come down to personal preference. Within the Necromancer, our first 2 points are going to go into Mindless Aggression, which doesn't give us too much, it's more just kind of traveling points. From there, we do get a big node, which is our second one. It's going to be Unnatural Strength. This is a massive damage increase whenever you pick it up. Our next 2 points are going into Commander of Darkness, which is perfect timing, since around this time we're going to be starting into maps. It really helps getting that extra 30% all resistances. That's going to go on both you and your minions, by the way, so it helps them survive as well. Makes gearing up on a league starter much easier having that 30% resistances. And our last 2 points are going into Plaguebringer. Now, this is experimental, and we're going to see how people like it. I think it might be better than Bone Barrier because of the DPS and AoE nerf that Carrion Golems got this league. Going this basically negates the nerfs, and we're back to the original Carrion Golem damage. Sadly, we do lose the survivability that we got from Bone Barrier. Now, if you don't feel tanky enough, I'd suggest dropping this and going with Bone Barrier instead. And that's it for our Ascendancy points, so let's go ahead and move on to our gem links. So let's first go over our leveling gem setup. This is going to be the shorthand version of what you should be rocking. From levels 1 through 10, you're going to use Holy Flame Totem and Summoning Raging Spirits, and then from 10 to 34, you do a 4-link SRS and a 4-link combo of skeletons and zombies. Then at 34 and beyond, you do make the switch over to Carrion Golems, although you do continue leveling up with your skeletons and zombies for a little bit extra DPS. Your main links for leveling until 34 will be Summon Raging Spirits, Minion Damage, Infernal Legion, and Elemental Focus, and in that order of importance. This is such a great AoE clearing ability and makes for really fast leveling. Combo SRS with Holy Flame Totem, Flame Wall, and Combustion to shred enemy fire resistance, and it's going to make for a ton of AoE and even single target damage in the first early stages of the game until you add in skeletons, zombies, melee physical damage, and maim. And at level 34, you get your 4-link Carrion Golem going with Carrion Golems, minion damage, melee physical damage, and maim, which then gets changed to multi-strike at level 38. For auras, you do want to start off with Summon Skitterbots and use that until you start your Carrion Golem setup at level 34, at which time you can link Dread Banner to Generosity. A lot of people ask about Spectres early on and if they should be using them or not, and honestly I wouldn't suggest using them until you get to maps where they're going to be able to survive a little bit better. But if you insist on using them early on, you can always pick up 2 Stygian Silverbacks in Act 2 The Riverways. Those are going to give you guys frenzy charges. Once you've gotten close to or at maps, you're going to start running your in-game setup. For Carrion Golems, we're going to be going with Carrion Golems, Minion Damage, Melee Physical Damage, Multi-Strike, Brutality, and for your 6th link, we're going to add in Impale. For your Spectres, we're going with Life Tap, Meat Shield, and Elemental Army. Now, Life Tap is basically the new Blood Magic. It's the same gem, it's just with a new name. And remember, Life Tap is needed for Race Spectre, so your 2 Carnage Chieftains and 1 Host Chieftain can cast their power and frenzy charges with life instead of mana. Otherwise, they're never going to be casting it enough for you to get the benefit. Next, we're going to use Convocation, Vol Molten Shell, and Assassin's Mark for boss damage. Molten Shell should be on your left click for auto casting 24/7. This is pretty important since we're not going with Bone Berry or Ascendancy. Next we're going with Summon Zombies, Feeding Frenzy, Maim, and Minion Life, all of which will be buffing our Carrion Golem damage, so make sure to keep up your zombies as much as possible, which is why that Minion Life is there to help them survive. In our second weapon, we're going to use Cast When Damage Taken, Immortal Call, and a high level Flame Dash. Just make sure to keep your Cast When Damage Taken and Immortal Call gems at level 5 and 7. For your ores, we're going to be using Dread Banner, linked to Generosity, Pride, and Summon Skitterbots. And lastly for gems, we have 2 unset rings. In the first one, we're going to have Desecrate, which you're going to keep at level 1 to keep the mana cost low. And for our second unset ring, we have Flesh Offering. That's it for our gem setup, so let's go ahead and talk about our gear. Now, as we talk about gear here, I'm going to be going over upgrade order as well, but stick around to the end of this section for a more in-depth gear upgrade order. I'll also be going over hardcore and solo self-found options as we go. Let's first start with our weapons. As we level up, really just focus on finding something with minion damage and resistances. And to get minion damage on any weapon, it doesn't even have to be a wand, just make sure to use an Essence of Fear for the easy peasy minion damage. And for resistances on there, best case scenario would be getting Chaos Resistance, but any resistance will work just fine honestly. Your first upgrade for the build will actually be a Clay Shaper. This should literally be the first time you spend currency on this build, and it should be to pick up one of these bad boys. It's going to give you +1 to maximum golems, and some golem damage. It's a huge damage boost, and well worth the early investment. Over the course of leveling, you actually want to purchase 2 of these, which would bring you to a total of 4 Carrion Golems until you get your Primordial Jewels later down the road when you're into mapping. From there, we get a Corrupted 6-link rare chest armor, with some life and resistances. You can easily pick up one of these pretty cheap by searching on the trade website and filter specifically for 4 blue, 1 red, and 1 green socket, which is the Carrion Golem links. You can always pick these up anywhere from 20 to 40 chaos depending on rolls. Lastly, much later on, you're going to want to work towards a brass dome as your in-game item, which typically was only for Elementalist, but I do think the Necromancer life version now will want it as well. It's a crazy defensive item, which we're going to talk more about in the in-game versions of this build, but I still wanted to point it out as something to work towards. For our helmet, we do want to level up ideally with a Wraithlord, a super cheap helmet with +2 to minion gems, which provides a ton of damage to help us level easier. These are only a few chaos, so another early pickup. And we're going to be using that for quite a while until you can craft a +2 minion gems and some life and resistances as well helmet. For our gloves, we're going to go with a simple pair with life and resistances, and then upgrade to one with crafted minion damage on it. We eventually want to aim for a pair with life, resistances, crafted minion damage, and chaos resistance. For our boots, we just want to find something with life and a little bit of movement speed while leveling, and then we're going to upgrade to get a pair with some resistances as well, and then lastly find a pair with at least 30% move speed and also high chaos resistance. For our amulet, we once again get to barely spend any currency here. We're just going to go with one with life and resistances and maybe even some chaos resistance if you can get there. And remember that you can always craft on there some chaos resistance if you can using the June Unveils, so be on the lookout for those as well. For the in-game version of the amulet, you can work toward one with +1 to dex and or int skill gems, as well as some life and resistances, but that is a little bit more complicated, so we're going to leave that for the in-game build guide and a different video. For our belt, we very simply go with a Darkness Enthroned, which is a super cheap belt, only a couple chaos, and that comes from Abyss content. You can sunk 2 Abyssal Jewels inside of this, both of which you should try and get up to 20% minion damage if you've used a minion skill recently. That and some life, and you're going to have a great starter belt and jewels. If you want, you can even work towards some jewels that also have minion physical damage on them as well. For our rings, we're looking at unset rings that have life, resistances, and maybe even some chaos resist. We'd eventually want to upgrade to one that has an open suffix, where we can also craft on there +1 to maximum endurance charges. Okay, perfect, so those were all the specific gear choices we made and the upgrade paths for those items. But what about in general? What items should we be focusing on buying, finding, and crafting first? I've come up with this list so you guys can spend your currency wisely in the most efficient way possible to maximize progress and build strength. We're first going to go over the Trade League version of the build, and then we're going to go over the solo self-found path. So first we want to pick up a Clay Shaper. These guys are going to be a +1 to maximum golems, which is going to be by far the best early upgrade as you level up. Literally immediately when you get your first 5 to 10 chaos, go out and buy one of these. It's going to be a huge power spike. And like I mentioned earlier, we do want 2 of these, so that's going to be your second purchase, which is going to bring you up to a total of 4 Carrion Golems for an even bigger power spike. Your third item should be a Wraith Lord for the +2 to minion gems. Throw in your current main skill, whether that be Summon Raging Spirits or Carrion Golems for a huge damage boost. Now you want to focus on getting a Tabula Rasa as your next purchase. Early on these go for about 20 to 30 chaos, which isn't too bad for a 6 link. I personally not suggest farming Humility Divination cards unless you're in solo Self-Found for this. Just run maps and you'll eventually get enough currency for a Tabula. Again, this will be a massive increase in DPS with that 6 link. After that, you're going to get your Darkness Enthroned belt and 2 accompanying jewels that are both going to have up to 20% increased minion damage if you use a minion damage skill recently, and a little bit of life. From there, upgrade your rings to get 2 unset rings. Having both of these unset rings lets you get all of your skills, so very useful at this point. Once you've got those core items, we'll start working toward our mid-level upgrades. The first of which being our Primordial Might Jewel to make our golems aggressive. This is a pretty big quality of life boost, but does come at a steep price. These typically start at about 50 chaos and sometimes shoot upwards of 150 chaos depending on the league. We're lucky in that up until now our build is incredibly cheap, and we will have cleared all the way to red tier maps by now, and you should start making a pretty good chunk of currency. From there we work on getting a +2 to 3 minion helmet. You can self-craft these pretty easily with bound fossils on an Elder helmet base. If you're lucky, you're going to also roll some minion life, but no worries if you can't, it's going to be alright for a while. From there, just give your gloves and boots and amulet some small upgrades to cap out your resistances and a decent life pool, which is about 5 to 5.5k to start off. And then we're going to finish out by getting our Primordial Jewels. From here, we're going to start off by buying 2 each of these Primordial Jewels. We're going to buy 2 Primordial Harmonies, and then 2 Primordial Imminences, and last a second Primordial Might. The reason we're getting 2 of each is because once we have 2 full sets, you're going to take one of those sets and sell it to a vendor, and it's going to pop out an Anima Stone, which is one of the most important items in your build, and we don't want to purchase it because it actually is pretty expensive. But doing this vendor recipe instead of buying it outright will save you some time and currency. Once you get that Anima Stone, you're going to be able to have 6 Carrion Golems total. However, you should save up for 2 Cold Iron Point daggers at this point to replace your Clay Shapers. Doing that will bring you down to 4 Carrion Golems, but you're going to have significantly more damage overall. After finishing up your Anima Stone and getting your daggers, you want to start crafting your Cluster Jewels. And once those are done, I'd say your League starter is complete and you're on your way to the in-game version of the build, which like I said will be a different video. It's going to come out in a few days after the league has started, so check the link in the description below if you are interested in seeing that guide. Okay, perfect, so that was for trade leagues, but what about all of our solo self-found bros? Have no fear friends, I have you covered as well. First we're going to be starting off working towards chancing a Clay Shaper. By chance orbing all of the rock breakers you find. Granted, this is RNG and you might end up finding a better minion damage weapon before then, but who knows, you could get lucky and find one pretty soon. Next, you want to farm up a Tabula Rasa by farming Humility cards in the Blood Aqueducts. This is going to be a huge damage boost getting that 6 link, so a pretty early priority. You can also start target farming maps that drop the Divination card, the Primordial. This Divination card gives you one of the 4 Primordial Jewels. It's RNG, but I've seen tons of people complete their Primordial Jewel sets using this Divination card set. These cards drop from Coves, Geode, Peninsula, and Waterways, just to name a few. You can also target farm a Darkness Enthroned belt by running Abyss content with the new Atlas modifiers that make Abyss more common. From there, work on upgrading your rings to good unset rings so you can fit in all of your skill gems. And moving on from there, make sure you do some delving so you can get some bound fossils, and always keep Elder base helmets to craft for those +2 to 3 minion gem helmets. Once you have a decent minion helmet, start upgrading your other items like gloves, boots, and amulet so you can have capped resistances and a strong life pool, which should at least be around 6k. You can also target farm maps to drop the Rite of Elements Divination card for a chance at level 21 Corrupted Golem gems. If you get lucky, you can get a Carrion Golem level 21 and it's going to boost your damage quite a bit. As you upgrade your gear, make sure to keep all minion related cluster jewels so you can alteration spam and roll for Rotten Claws on your large cluster jewels, and then replenishing presence on your aura medium cluster jewels. You can also target farm our in-game chest, the Brass Dome, by running Maze of the Minotaur. And one last tip here, since it's not that easy to get Cold Iron Point daggers by chance orming, we do prioritize getting a Convoking Wand with +1 to minion and intelligence skill gems. Those wand would be best in slot for solo self-found, but are certainly more complicated to craft. If you're interested in checking that out, definitely check out my crafting tutorial on how to make one of those for yourself. And that's really it for target farming in solo self-found. I've been surprised how many people actually play this build in solo self-found and have a lot of success. Even without the primordial jewels, you can easily push to in-game with solo self-found gear with this build. I've actually been leveling this way with league start situations for several leagues now, and it's always worked out great for me. We had to change up a few things this league with the nerfs, but overall I think it's still going to be a very smooth leveling process and even up to the red tier maps. And with the build upgrade paths out of the way, that does bring the build guide to my final thoughts. Even with this build getting a bit of a nerf this league, I do believe it's going to be once again a top tier fantastic skill for a league starter. Personally, I'm deciding between this and the Elementalist start right now. Like I've said, you get more damage with this version, but less survivability, so it's a hard choice. I think each person will just kind of have to make that choice themselves. The good thing is, you can nerf Carrion Golem damage, but you can never nerf the playstyle of Carrion Golems. They jump around and clear really well, all the while you get to run in circles and not die to bosses or maps, so it makes progressing really easy. It also makes for a very safe and rewarding playstyle that I personally feel is always really good and best for new players specifically. That mixed with this build being very cheap to get running all the way up to red tier maps, you really get to pool your earned currency and not have to spend it for a while, like I said, up until you get into those red tier maps and in-game bosses. It helps you progress farther and faster, so I always recommend this Carrion Golem builds as league starters, and I certainly will with this league as well. But yeah, if you ended up enjoying this guide and it helped you out in any way, do hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for a ton more content in the months ahead with Ultimatum League. Check out my Patreon and Nexus store if you're interested in supporting the channel. And to everyone out there, if you have made it this far into the video, thank you tons for sticking around and taking the full dive. Thanks everybody, and I will catch you all on the next one.